How's everybody feeling this evening? Very good, very good. As you have heard, I'm Sean Blackmon, one of the organizers of Stop Police Terror Project DC. And our organization has been around since around the year 2014, which of course was around the time that Officer Darren Wilson murdered Mike Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, which is really when a lot of folks, that's the time that they mark as when the movement for Black Lives sort of kicked off in earnest. Although, of course, the seeds were planted after the murder of Trayvon Martin in 2012. So during that time, there was basically an ad hoc group of organizers and activists, and we were then known as DC Ferguson. But as time goes on and we sort of feel the need to sharpen our mission and make clear the sort of work we are interested in being engaged in, we decided to change our name to Stop Police Terror Project DC. And as the name suggests, of course, we're chiefly concerned with addressing racist police terror here in Washington, DC, but also addressing state-sanctioned violence in all its forms, because we feel that police terror is really just one of the more obvious examples, if you will, of state-sanctioned violence. If you have a job and don't work and don't receive a living wage, we consider that violence. If the housing that is available is not affordable housing, we consider that violence, so on and so forth. So anywhere that is taking place, we feel it is our duty to be there. And as many of you, or as some of you I'm sure know, we've done quite a bit of work on a piece of legislation called the NEAR Act, which means Neighborhoods Engaged Achieve Results. Yeah. And basically that's supposed to be in place to empower poor working and oppressed communities here in Washington, DC, which of course are chiefly Black and brown communities, to really serve as their own sort of public safety network. Because we know that in Black communities, in oppressed communities, the police basically serve as an occupying force and are often a violent and reactionary institution that more often than not serves just as a means of brutality, death, and to funnel people into the mass incarceration system. So we saw it as our duty to try to put as much distance between the community and the police as we can. And so the NEAR Act and sort of similar pieces that you see in Richmond, California, and Chicago and Baltimore and other places is supposed to be in place to give resources to people in the community, some of whom have been doing this kind of work for decades, to serve as violence interrupters and to truly create a culture of public safety. Because to be frank, we know that the cops don't really provide that sort of safety, nor do Black folks generally feel that safe around the police. And in terms of Black August and the history on that, Mama Ayanna Mashama of the Black August Organizing Committee out in Oakland, she says that Black August really started being practiced in earnest in 1979. And it really has its roots in the radical prison movement as a way to sort of remember the warriors and freedom fighters behind prison walls that were struggling for better conditions, people like W.L. Noland, John Cluchet, of course, George Jackson, who even in death is the beating heart of Black August. And it's a time for fasting, it's a time for study, it's a time for recommitment to the struggle on all of its fronts, so that we can basically steel ourselves and better prepare ourselves to deal with the slings and arrows that come from this vicious, oppressive, white supremacist capitalist system. And one of the chief aspects, if you will, of Black August is political prisoners. And these are people who basically are imprisoned either because of their politics or because of activities they were engaged in within in the course of struggle. And I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with the COINTELPRO effort that railroaded and a lot of times murdered people from groups like the Black Panther Party, the Young Lords, the Young Patriots Organization, the American Indian Movement, so on and so forth. Any group, any organization that was trying to stand against the status quo and bring about a more equitable world, in a more truly democratic society, were severely punished and had the full weight of the state brought down upon them, and many of them are still incarcerated to this day. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to be in communication with them, not just out of a sense of morality, although certainly morally it is the right thing to do, but frankly I see it as a small token of gratitude for the sacrifices that they made so that we could pick up the baton and keep running with our righteous struggle. And that's why I'm really excited and feel that we're really fortunate this evening to be speaking with our featured speaker, who is Brother Jihad Abdul Mumit, who's the national chair of the Jericho Movement. For those who don't know, the Jericho Movement is really one of the main organizations that advocate for political prisoners here in the United States. It was started by a powerful sister named Sophia Bakari, who, by the way, wrote a great book called The War Before that I highly recommend if you haven't read it, and it has a lot of great history there. But Brother Jihad really has spent his life in struggle. As a young man, he was involved in the anti-war movement, I believe against the Vietnam War. At one point, he became a member of the Black Panther Party. Later, he was a part of the Black Liberation Army, which was an armed clandestine group. It was an underground group. And he actually himself was a political prisoner here in the United States for 23 years. 23 years of his life spent behind bars because of his political activities, chiefly in Lewisburg and Leavenworth prisons. And the brother's a father, a husband, he's a playwright. He works with prisoners to this day. So he spent 23 years in prisons, and now he works in prison, you see what I mean? So he definitely understands the contradictions and conditions inherent to prisoners in this country. And he'll basically be speaking to us today about the importance of being in communication with political prisoners and why it's necessary to connect that to the broader Black August tradition. And so I'm not sure, are we, okay. So he's not here just yet, but I think it's also important to sort of take note of the different kinds of political prisoners, if you will, because we have folks who not only are behind bars, but we also have people in exile. And I'm thinking specifically of Assata Shakur and Nahanda Abiodun, who are both in exile currently in Cuba. And Nahanda Abiodun actually didn't even go into exile until like 1990, if I'm not mistaken. And so basically why that's important is they were given asylum under the revolutionary government of Cuba, of course, under the Castro government, then, of course, then President Fidel Castro, who since passed away. But this is a part of their sort of international solidarity piece, which is something that runs deep within the history of revolutionary Cuba. We know the solidarity they showed to South Africa, Angola, Grenada, and so many other countries. So that is also important to keep in mind. So there's basically more than one way to sort of be kept away from the movement. And we also know that even being incarcerated doesn't necessarily stop people from being in communication with the outside world. Because if we look at Mumia Abu-Jamal, who's probably the world's best known political prisoner, and who actually has a hearing coming up next Friday, I believe, on the 30th. He's one of our great commentators, written many books. When you listen to his commentaries, which you can hear at prisonradio.org, to be frank, he's a lot better informed than a lot of us out here. And so that kind of brilliance and that kind of tenacity and that kind of upright personhood and stern humanity cannot be kept at bay by prison walls. And so this is the kind of fortitude that we're talking about when we talk about our political prisoners, of which Mumia Abu-Jamal is just one. So yeah, I'm gonna pass it on now to our folks here. We're gonna make this thing happen.
Yeah. All right, thank you so much, Sean. That was awesome. Perfect.